Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen. I'm the Executive Director of the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College in Bayside, New York. Welcome to this evening's event, Under Siege Again, Holocaust Distortion and the Rise of Hate Crimes Against Jews. 6 weeks ago, I had a conversation with Michael Brobner from the Queens District's office. We were talking about the prosecuting hate crimes, and I got inspired and motivated because he reminded me of a conversation when a parent called our center last year saying that there had been a swastika which had appeared in a local school. And I actually didn't have an answer on what to do other than shock and revulsion. And so in thinking about putting this event together tonight, 3 things really came up. 1, understanding. 2, engagement. And 3, cooperation. Specifically, why is anti-Semitism rising nationally and internationally? And what recourse do we all have at the local level? And finally, how can we support each other regionally, be it in the New York area or elsewhere in the country or the world? So tonight we've brought together 6 sites from across the New York region, West Point and Queensborough, to host this important dialogue. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Christine Mangino, President of Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York.
Good evening. Education is a powerful tool to safeguard our community's values of diversity and tolerance. Queensborough Community College, the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center, and I are proud to welcome you this evening on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, and to also mark with you the 76th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz-Birkenau extermination and concentration camp. I want to welcome and thank Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz, Michael Brobner, Chief of the Queens County District Attorney's Hate Crimes Bureau, and Mark Weitzman, Director of Government Affairs at the Simon Wiesenthal Center, for being here this evening at Queensborough. This is the biggest event the KHC has ever coordinated. Our gathering comes at a very critical and increasingly volatile period in our American story. We are grateful to the consortium of sponsors here for joining forces, resources, and supporting each other. The Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan College, the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in White Plains, the Holocaust Museum and Center for Tolerance and Education at Rockland Community College, and the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. It is great to be a beneficiary of our collective strength and resolve. Our mission here at Queensborough, one of the most diverse and inclusive colleges in America, and the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate current and future generations about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. In doing so, we teach and empower young people, especially, to become agents of positive social change in their lives and in their communities. And the need to do so is great and urgent. We saw at the Capitol signs, gestures, and actions of anti-Semitism, and they are very much alive today. We even saw a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt worn and celebrated at the siege. Hanny Liebman, a Holocaust survivor and a long-time volunteer at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center, recalled the burning of the Reichstag in Germany and says that that was no different from the attack on the Capitol building. Both demonstrations were the culmination of lies, chaos, and riots, as Mrs. Liebman has said. Tonight, we will speak truth and address discord. We will consider how anti-Semitism, growing anti-Semitism, fuels Holocaust distortion, and the challenges that presents in prosecuting local religiously based hate crimes. We are reminded how important it is not to just stand together, but to act together in the interests of the cultural, educational, and civic needs of all of our neighborhoods. Whether in Queens or up in the Bronx, throughout New York City, Long Island, Westchester, Rockland, and Orange or beyond. As Amanda Gorman, our nation's young poet laureate, and so eloquently said at the inauguration, we are striving to forge a nation with purpose, to compose a country committed to all cultures, colors, characters, and conditions of man. And so we lift our gazes not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. At Queensborough's Kupferberg Holocaust Center, we come together, students, survivors, and community members, to learn through and with our hearts, minds, and actions. And we share that mission with you this evening. So thank you for joining us. I am looking forward to our conversation, to being with you and learning and doing more together. It's now my honor to introduce Queens District Attorney Melinda Katz. Melinda frequently says that justice must always look the same, no matter how we look, what we believe, or who we are. Welcome, Melinda.
It's so nice to be involved in this event tonight. I do want to thank the Kupferberg Center. I want to thank all that are involved, the Simon Wiesenthal Center, everyone that are representing different organizations throughout the country, really, that care deeply about the remembrance of the Holocaust. We are in a new generation. It's interesting because I'm probably one of the last generation of my age. I grew up in a world that didn't know a world without Israel. I grew up in a world where, it was a common conversation at every table. What happened, the number of people that died, the number of other people that died in addition, the 11 million. And so, it is amazing that we continue to do these events as we remember the Holocaust and as we remind not only ourselves the importance of standing together, standing up for each other. And in a world where the younger generation didn't live through it and may not have had the conversation at their dinner tables with their aunts and their uncles and their grandparents. I think it is so important that we continue to do these events. I also want to point out, in a world in which we just had a national conversation as a result of George Floyd's killing, where people really were standing in the streets, protesting with one another. I myself was doing Occupy on park corners so that shooters would understand that, they didn't own the streets. And then we had the protests that were happening. And we were all standing up for one another, I think, during that time. It's an important dynamic to remember why that is so important. When I became the DA a year ago, we did not have a hate crimes bureau. We had a hate crimes bureau that was in conjunction with a gangs bureau. As many of you know, even just intrinsically, that they are extremely different crimes. They do not have the same investigators. They won't have the same ADAs. They don't have the same issues that happen. And it was important for me to have someone who was experienced to make sure that should there be hate crimes in the borough of Queens County, that someone was there who had that experience, who had that caring, and who was able to sift through issues to make sure that we were holding people accountable for those crimes. And so I know Michael Brovner is on this call. He is the Bureau Chief of Hate Crimes. My Chief Executive, I believe, is also on this call, Chief Assistant Jen Nyberg. And so, to everyone that is here on this Remembrance Day, it is good work that we do to remind us every year of the importance of those, remembering those that died, the importance of standing up for one another, the importance of making sure that the next generation learns from the experience of the previous one. And I thank you for allowing me to just be a very small part of this. But more importantly, I thank the organizations that are on this Zoom for doing the work that you do day in and day out for our communities. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So now what we'll do is we'll begin the event to get into the conversation. And we'll first have Mr. Weitzman present, followed by Mr. Brovner. Then we'll have a dialogue and go into questions and answers. We've disabled the chat for security purposes, so please be sure to submit your questions via Q&A. And now I'd like to introduce formally Mr. Mark Weitzman. He is Director of Government Affairs for the Simon Wiesenthal Center. He's a member of the official U.S. delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Authority, the IHRA, where he chaired the Committee on Anti-Semitism and Holocaust Denial, and is currently chairing the Museum and Memorials Working Group. He was the architect of the IHRA's adoption of the working definition of anti-Semitism, which is the first anti-Semitism with any formal status, and he was also the lead author on the IHRA's working definition of Holocaust distortion and denial. Mr. Weitzman is a participant in the program on religion and foreign policy for the Council on Foreign Relations, served as a member of the advisory panel of experts on freedom of religion or belief for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, as the often referred to as OSCE, and co-chaired the working group on international affairs of the Global Forum on Anti-Semitism. He currently serves as the vice president of the Association of Holocaust Organizations. Please join me in welcoming Mark Weitzman.
Thank you very much, Laura. And thank you, and I'm honored to be here with DA Katz and Dr. Mangino, who's hosting this and really created a wonderful structure in Queens that I think could be a model of community engagement and educational engagement that I hope many others will draw strength from and carry forward. So thank you very much for the invitation and for your participation in this program. I want to begin, before I begin my formal remarks, actually I should mention I also want to thank all the other institutions, the 5 institutions that have come together in this consortium as well. So thank you very much for that. I want to begin my remarks by stressing that although we're talking about Holocaust distortion, although we're talking about anti-Semitism, the reality is we're talking about people, because those ideologies, those actions have impact on people directly, which is why I was really glad to hear DA Katz's remarks about the unit interacts directly with the community. We're not talking about abstractions. And I think on today, January 27th, the day of the liberation of Auschwitz, and it's an extraordinary, I was there last year in Auschwitz for the 75th anniversary of the commemoration, and it's an extraordinarily emotional place and event to go through. But I just, again, can't stress enough that the impact is on the individual, and that's what we need to remember as we have this discussion. So I want to, and again, reference was made, Dr. Mangino made reference to the recent insurrection at the Capitol, where you saw a man in a Camp Auschwitz hoodie, and I don't know how many of you saw afterwards, but a week after, when Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, gave her remarks in which she called for a review of the events, she focused on this one image. And if you had a chance to watch the video of it, I didn't want to take the time to put the entire video clip on, she was visibly shaken. Her voice was quite emotional in her reaction. And it struck me that the Speaker of the House, a veteran politician who's seen everything and done it and been exposed to everything, why was this specific image the one that she called out and spoke so directly and had such an impact on her? And I think it was because she recognized that the symbol was not only an attack on Jews, but it was an attack on certain core values that are the basis for American and Western liberal democracies. The Professor Yehuda Bauer, who's considered the Dean of Holocaust and Genocide Scholars in our lifetime, has pointed out that the central Nazi motivation for World War II was the hatred of Jews. That was underlay all their other approaches. There's a memo from Hitler directly where he discusses that pre-war and speaks specifically that's the pretext, that Lebensraum, the drive for land, etc., was all a pretext because of the hatred of Jews who would control the world under the guise of communism. So not just the 6 million Jews, but the reality, the minimum 30 million other civilians, victims during World War II, were killed and murdered because of the Holocaust. The Holocaust led directly, and World War II, led directly to the creation of an international outcry that resulted in bodies like the United Nations, the European Union, and others like that, as well as concepts like genocide. And here you see the picture of Raphael Lemkin, the man who created the concept of genocide in 1943, or crimes against humanity. And the central picture is a British jurist, Hersch Lauterpacht, who was an assistant and aide in the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunals and was responsible for helping come up with the concept of crimes against humanity. And finally, Simon Wiesenthal, who I had the pleasure of and the honor and privilege of getting to know and considering one of my mentors, who was not only the namesake of our institution and a humanitarian, a champion of human rights, but his focus was on bringing Nazis to justice, not vengeance, and that way helped bridge the gap between Nuremberg and the beginning of the war crimes tribunals that addressed the Balkan and Rwandan war crimes issues. Each of these three people were Jews who had something else in common. They were all born in Europe, and they all had most of their family, some cases almost all their family, wiped out by the Nazis. They were victims, some were survivors, some got out just before the war, but they took that experience and translated it into concepts that helped shape our liberal Western democracy. Today, those concepts are under sophisticated attack by those who want to destroy liberal democracies and return to the politics of the past where prejudice ruled. To do this, they feel that they have to attack the underpinning, the basis, which is the Holocaust. And they do it not by denial, which has been exiled to the fringes of Western extremism after the David Irving trial, Deborah Lipstadt trial in 2000, and is now really only places like Iran, where it's state policy, does Holocaust denial occupy a central place. Rather, it's Holocaust distortion, the attack that does not destroy, does not claim that the Holocaust did not happen, but manipulates and twists it and distorts it for political purposes. So I want to be very specific and give a few concrete examples to illustrate this. So for example, there is a law in Poland that was called the IPN law, which states that whoever publicly claims, contrary to the historical facts, the Polish nation's or the Polish state's responsibility or partial responsibility for the Nazi crimes committed by the Third Reich shall be liable to a fine or imprisonment for up to 3 years. This law is a few years old, and there was a huge international outcry when it was first announced a couple of years ago. And as a result, it was amended in Poland, so the criminal provisions were dropped, but their civil provisions still exist, where anybody can sue somebody and force them to prove that they're not shaming or slandering anyone in Poland by claiming that there was complicity with the Nazis. We know that for a fact there certainly was. There are two eminent historians, Jan Grabowski and Barbara Engelking, who have in recent years explored the issues based on archival evidence and evidence of survivors of individual Poles or members of the police force who did collaborate with the Nazis and were complicit in the eventual murder of Jews. They are now under trial in Poland, literally with a verdict expected early February on a trial for slander that was instituted by a government-supported NGO that's extremely nationalistic. That is just one of the examples in Poland. Another example is the Polish government has an institution that is an official government institution that is charged with being in charge of the historical memory of World War II and other events. And here there's a press clipping, because I exposed this a couple of years ago, where the man in charge of publications there is actually the publisher of the notorious British Holocaust denier David Irving, of his works in translation in Poland. So we have the man who is responsible for introducing into Poland a man who was judged by a British court to be a neo-Nazi, an anti-Semite, and a Holocaust denier, is actually now in charge of publications for the official government-sponsored institution dealing with the memory of that period. Now, Poland is, for example, a staunch supporter of Israel. They have spent immense amounts of sums in supporting Auschwitz and some of the other concentration campsites, and they will always let you know about these efforts, but they're in the same time, as I'm pointing out here, they're government-sponsored or government, at least sympathy to evidence to distort the Holocaust. The same thing is true, for example, in Hungary, where again, there's some strong government support for Israel and government support for some Jewish community bodies and so on. But here we have a picture of a poster with a man on it, and that man was the jurist and historian who, as a member of the Hungarian government in the World War II era, introduced the Hungarian version of the Nuremberg laws to Hungary, the laws that disenfranchised Jews in Germany and stripped them of their civil rights. He introduced those laws in Hungary, paving the way for the deportation of approximately 500,000 Hungarian Jews, 400,000 to 450,000 Hungarian Jews who were later murdered. The announcement of that led to a protest. Here's the protest. The Hungarian government backed down, but this is part of a process where the Hungarian government has announced certain actions that fall under Holocaust distortion and sometimes back down and sometimes not. The next one is a writer, Albert Voss. You'll see a little bit more about him in a second, whose works were reintroduced into the Hungarian national curriculum. Voss was an anti-Semite whose most famous story was actually posted by the neo-Nazi site Stormfront. Stormfront was the first neo-Nazi site run by David Duke's best friend in many ways, and they republished it and reposted it. And yet Voss's works there was a day of commemoration, of celebration of his work in New York at Hungary House. And when the then Hungarian Consul General was reproached about it, I was one of the people involved with that, he's saying that they have to respect the sensitivity of those who applaud the patriotism and literature of Albert Voss. So in other words, even when offered an opportunity for the Hungarian government to disassociate themselves from this works, he refused to accept that opportunity. More recently, there are a couple of other examples of these laws in Russia, where a blogger has been prosecuted for writing the absolute truth that Soviet Russia and Nazi Germany invasion of Poland on September 1st, 1939 was the start of World War II. He was prosecuted for that. Ukraine has a similar law. I just want to, because I'm running out of time, I just want to bring up that today, literally as we speak here, earlier today in Lithuania, the chair of the Lithuanian Parliament's Commission of Historical Memory, in his address on January 27th, said, and I'm quoting the translation, that Jews participated in the Holocaust. That's an issue that needs to be studied more. So this is not just in the past, this is even today in political elites of different countries, we find this issue going on. This is why I think the issue was one that Nancy Pelosi responded to. And certainly in the United States, and I don't want to make this a referendum on President Trump because he has, for example, signed an executive order that strengthened U.S. actions on anti-Semitism domestically. But certainly his statement in Charlottesville, after Charlottesville, and you can see the Nazi salute and the Nazi flag held by the protesters, helped create an environment that emboldened extremists, whether they read it rightly or wrongly. They took it as emboldening and support for their extremism, which later played out in the events that we saw in the insurrection in the Capitol and with the Camp Auschwitz hoodie that I began with. This is why the UN Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Religion and Belief, Dr. Ahmed Shahid, when he issued a landmark report on anti-Semitism to the General Assembly, said that anti-Semitism is toxic to democracy. And that is what I think Nancy Pelosi understood and why she reacted to that image so strongly. To conclude, in 1985, after then President Ronald Reagan paid an embarrassing visit and homage to the Nazi cemetery at Bitburg, then West Germany, German President Richard von Weizsäcker, whose father was actually convicted, was a diplomat for the Nazis and was convicted in Nuremberg, gave a remarkable speech to the Bundestag by quoting an old Jewish teaching that, quote, the secret of redemption lies in remembrance, end quote. Redemption may be far beyond the horizon or out of our hands, but the memory of the Holocaust is preserved and protected so that democracy could be protected and preserved, and that Jews and all others will never, ever experience anything like the Holocaust again. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. We really appreciate your presentation, and we look forward to the coming conversation. I wanted to mention for some of you that are having technical issues, we are recording this presentation, and it will be available on all of the centers who are participating, their websites. Now it's my great pleasure to introduce Michael Brovner, who has been with the Queens District Attorney's Office in New York City since 1995. He currently serves as the Bureau Chief of the Hate Crimes Bureau. He's successfully tried multiple hate crimes and violent gang-related crimes, as well as led investigations into numerous acts of gang violence and hate crimes throughout Queens County. He is specialized in prosecuting multi-defendant cases, including conducting 2 dual jury trials. Prior to becoming Bureau Chief, Mr. Brovner worked for more than 20 years in the Queens District Attorney's Gang Violence and Hate Crimes Bureau, supervising other assistants in prosecuting hate crimes and violent gang cases. He has trained prosecutors and law enforcement officials on prosecuting hate crimes and gangs, effectively using expert testimony, deciphering and combating graffiti, ethical considerations in gang trials, and prosecuting the sale of forged documents. Please join me in welcoming Michael Brofner.
Thank you, Laura. And thank you, everyone, for having me. I really appreciate it. What I'm going to do is try to condense a PowerPoint that normally takes about an hour into approximately 7 minutes. What I'm hoping to do is talk about the New York State hate crime law and how we use it to combat hate crime. So hopefully this will work. Here we go. So the statute requires that a crime be committed, and the crime must have been caused because the defendant either intentionally selects the person or intentionally commits the act or acts in whole or in substantial part because of belief or perception regarding the race, color, national origin, ancestry, gender identity or expression, religion, religious practice, age, disability, or sexual orientation of the victim. Now, the key here is that there has to be a crime. If it's just an offensive statement, that's not a crime, and that's not prosecutable. The crimes are specified by statute. They're usually property crimes, crimes of violence, or sex crimes, but not every crime can be elevated as a hate crime with that extra element that I just described. When someone's convicted of a hate crime, it enhances the sentence. So if someone's charged with an A misdemeanor, let's say assault 3, as a hate crime, that ups it to an E felony. And if someone's charged with like a C felony, it would up it to a B felony. So it enhances the sentence. And as you can see from the definition of what's covered, gender, sexual orientation, religion, religious practice, all of those different things, it applies to everyone. So it's not a crime that only applies to minorities, only applies to Jews, it applies to everyone. The key is what the defendant intends and why the defendant is committing the crime. We also have another charge, which is aggravated harassment in the first degree. This is also a felony. And here again, the defendant has to commit the crime because of a belief or perception regarding one of these protective classes with the intent to annoy, threaten, or alarm. And it's for the traditional historical images of hate crime. So it would be against a religious location. It could be a Nazi swastika, the burning of a cross, or displaying of a noose. All these traditional symbols of hate crimes are covered by aggravated harassment, and these are a felony. So those are the different crimes, the statutes rather. Now, why are these statutes important? Well, because hate crimes are unique. They're different than other crimes. They have different challenges. But part of it is because of all the different people that are involved. Unlike a regular vanilla crime like a robbery, where someone is robbed and that's awful, it's not just the victim that's the victim. It's the victim, the victim's community, the advocacy groups that are also get involved in this, other people that care or feel that they could be a victim of a hate crime similarly, and the media because of this attention, because of people's interest in these type of cases. It's also unique because normally when you're trying to prove a crime, it doesn't matter why the defendant committed the crime. If someone sells drugs, we don't have to prove they sold drugs for a particular reason. Whereas with a hate crime, we have to prove this unusual element, this motive, that they committed the crime in whole or substantial part because of this bias, because of this issue. And there's also the greater public attention that's generated when someone commits a hate crime because of all the factors that go into it, that affect so many people other than just the simple victim. And the media takes that and they sensationalize it. I had a case where there was a Muslim victim who was opening up a mosque and was attacked and stabbed. He was then interviewed by 2 journalists, one from the New York Post, one from the Daily News. The New York Post is more conservative, the Daily News is more liberal. And it was an interesting situation because he talked to them at the same time, but they both spun it the way they wanted to spin it. Mosque victim warns of an eye for an eye versus mosque victim harbors no ill will. So those are the type of issues that we deal with when we're prosecuting these cases. And now just looking at the state of hate crime in the United States currently, this is the federal statistics that we have. It's 2018, 2019. You can see there's about 1,500 hate crimes that occur based on religion. Of that, about 60%, 55% are anti-Semitic crimes. So that's disturbing. In New York, it's a little different, and these are from 2019 and 2020. You can see there's a significant drop in hate crimes. That's probably because of COVID, but the percentage of hate crimes that are anti-Semitic are still about the same, about 85 to 90%. The good news about these type of hate crimes in New York is at least about 30% of them are property crimes. They're, the swastikas on a wall versus anything more serious than that. But still, it's troubling, and it's something that we have to combat. And that's why we prosecute these cases seriously and take them so seriously. Now, as I said, we have to prove basically the intent. Why does the defendant do this? And that's going to be circumstantial evidence, because you can't know what someone's thinking unless you have to go to circumstantial evidence to prove that. The easiest way of doing it is frequently with what they're saying, the slurs, the epithets that they use. And courts have found that that is sufficient if we can establish the hate element through these type of slurs, especially when there's no other reason, no other justification for the crime. But the issue we have to establish is, what does the word mean? A lot of times someone can say something, but are they saying it for this particular reason? Do they understand what it means? This was a case that happened in Manhattan, and the defendant in this case did the swastika, wrote Nazis on a fire department ambulance. It seems like it's a hate crime. But in this case, what he was actually saying was these guys were fascists, not Nazis, not anti-Jewish at all. He had some psychological issues and basically blamed them for making it hard for him to sleep because they kept making noise. So you have to look beyond just the words and see what's motivating, what's causing the defendant to commit the crime. Another thing we can use is location, houses of worship. That can be how we establish that this crime that the defendant committed was a hate crime. Also, gay pride parades, gay bars. These are all things that we look to establish what the motive was, why the defendant committed this particular crime. Another thing that's really important is the statements that the defendants make. Sometimes this is the most damning and powerful evidence because it really reveals the defendant's motive, his racist thinking or her racist thinking. And when you think about it, a lot of times the defendants feel justified because they think that everyone should understand that this person is disgusting. It's not really a person, it's an animal. And that's why he's justified in doing the crime he did. And when we're talking to the defendant, trying to find out, we want to know exactly what the defendant said. We want to hear him describe the victim, because when he does that, it's going to reveal the racist thinking. How did you know the person was Jewish? How did you know the person was Muslim? How did you know the person was gay? All those things are going to come out and let you understand why he committed this crime. We had a case from 2005. The defendant was known as Fat Nick Minucci. And at around 3 o'clock in the morning in Howard Beach, he came across a group of African Americans that were in his neighborhood and felt that they were going to commit a crime. So he confronts them with a bat, chases them, catches one of them, and calls them the N-word, hits him with the bat, breaks his jaw, a bunch of other things. And he talked to us and explained his thinking.
I says, no. I says, they're looking to get something tonight. Now,
why'd you think that?
2 weeks ago, they robbed a car.
And these kids?
No, not these kids. And
But who? What? I don't understand.
witnesses saw, it was my friend's mother, and witnesses saw the kids running the weeds. So I said, let's check
What
that
kids?
weeds. I don't know the kids.
Were they white, black?
No, they're black kids. They're black kids. 1 week ago, a kid by 207 Park got stabbed. A 14-year-old kid on his bike. He got stabbed by a car full of black people.
Right. So now, when you saw these three guys running, you said that they were running down by the weeds.
No, they weren't. They were walking.
Well,
at
they
this
were going
point.
down by the weeds. What do you think they were going to do down there?
I have no idea. One kid had snippers. One kid had a screwdriver. I have no idea what the other kids had. One kid had a school bag.
Right.
I don't know what the other kid had, but the kid that I caught had snippers and a screwdriver.
Now, are there a lot of black people in your neighborhood?
No,
All right. Which neighborhood is this? Is this Howard Beach?
this is Howard Beach.
All right. What's the other side called?
Lindenwood. That's where I live.
Now, Lindenwood is.
Lindenwood's black, Spanish, Indian, white.
Wasn't it?
I live with these people.
Just right on the other side of.
So there
I
you
said,
can
no.
there you can see he felt justified in attacking this people, felt totally comfortable with his racist beliefs and expressed that. Another thing we can use is we can use expert testimony. And I see I'm running out of time, so I'll quickly wrap it up here. And these experts can then explain and educate the jury on what certain terms mean, what certain symbols mean. And we can use this expert testimony to explain what would be a seemingly irrational random crime and frame it as it is, a hate crime. So thank you for your time and look forward to the questions.
Thank you so much, Michael. We really appreciate your taking us through a lot of the nuances of hate crime. And Mark, I would like to bring you back into the conversation. And I guess my first question is, Mark, you focused on the trends internationally of anti-Semitism and why that is so pernicious. And often we talk about anti-Semitism as the longest hatred. And Michael, you're talking about the nuances and intent behind people who are accused or prosecuted or not for committing hate crimes. And I'm wondering, and we start to look at balancing the international and national and the local, is there something that sets apart anti-Semitic acts of hatred from other hate crimes?
Who's going first on that one?
You can go, Mark.
Okay, well, so first of all, I'm going to say that, well, I did focus on the international to a certain degree, but I also, obviously, I brought some recent American incidents in, is that in a certain sense, especially in an age of social media, maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more going down, there are no borders. People are getting their information, getting fed and misinformation, particularly and propaganda, particularly through social media, and it feeds into it. And we have documented cases of members of violent anti-Semitic groups in the U.S., what used to be Atomwaffen or the base, et cetera, training with neo-Nazi groups in Europe, for example, in Ukraine and Sweden and so on. And I'm talking about within the last 6 months and a year. So there is, in a certain way, the impact of what is circulating globally is felt very strongly sometimes on the local level. And these are groups that have been linked to murders in the United States over the past few years of Jews, of gay Jew in a certain case. So that's an issue. However, I think that I have to say that anti-Semitism, while it is a form of hatred and racism, is more or in some ways different from what we generally talk about as racism. And part of that is the confusion over what exactly and who exactly Jews are. Are they a race? Are they a nationality? Are they an ethnicity? Are they a religion? That's one of the reasons why President Trump issued that executive order, which I thought was very useful and helpful, to point out that they don't necessarily fall under Jews don't necessarily fall under the Title VI protections, which are aimed at certain of those protected categories, because there is that fluidity. And that's why the definition of anti-Semitism that we worked on, which has been adopted by 30 countries and hundreds of municipalities and colleges and so on, is so important. So I'm going to stop with that and give Michael time, but I hopefully gave a little bit of clarity to that.
I think as far as the impact on the victim, it's the same, whether someone's Jewish, whether someone's gay, whether someone's Muslim, whether that aspect doesn't change. I think the issue is that anti-Semitism and anti-Semitic hate crimes seem like it's more common, that people feel more comfortable. It's easier to slip into that than some of the other crimes. So I think that's what I've noticed in New York, especially with younger defendants doing things like swastikas, drawing swastikas or painting swastikas or anti-Jewish expressions on walls and things. I think that's something that they feel more comfortable with than some other crimes. So I think that's the big difference at the local level.
I mean, that absolutely makes sense. And I'm thinking, Mark, you mentioned, anti-Semitism, one of the core issues is who are Jewish people. And so with so much instability that's been going on in our country, we had an insurrection not too long ago and domestic terrorists. I guess my question is, are Jewish people safer or more vulnerable now? And what are sort of the positive and negative consequences of this?
Look, I think that the statistics that Michael showed make it clear, along with the unfortunate anecdotes that we can think of, whether it was the shooting in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, which was the worst act of violence of mass murder of Jews in American history, the Jersey City killings and so on. There is certainly a sense now where Jews are much more exposed and much more vulnerable and are being targeted more than there had been previously. But I'm also an historian, and I have to say that anti-Semitism is part of the warp and woof of American society. We're New Yorkers, those of us who are New Yorkers. And let's go back to our history. Peter Stuyvesant, the man whose namesake, of elite high schools and so on and so forth, was an outright anti-Semite who wanted to keep Jews out of New York. He had to be overruled by his bosses. He also was a slaver. So anti-Semitism and slavery have been linked in American history in many ways throughout history. And we've had episodes of violent anti-Semitism, even the more recent past in the 1980s and 90s. So in some ways, I think the issue is that not that it's not present, but I think that the general climate in the United States, the overheated climate in the United States today, the impact of social media, which has empowered extremists of all types in ways that they never had faced before, has created a situation where I would have to say agree that Jews are more vulnerable and more threatened on a direct personal level than they've been certainly in recent American history.
On the bright side, I think because of what's happened, a lot of Jewish targets have gotten harder. There's been a lot of efforts to combat that, make like temples and synagogues safer. I also think that Jews as a whole are better at reporting hate crimes than some other groups. So I think our ability to prosecute those type of crimes is stronger. So that's on the pro side, though I hear what Mark's saying.
Well, and I think it's also interesting because I'd like to, move the conversation a little bit towards social media. In the past, I think 24 hours, and Mark, you'll know better, there was an announcement that I think that there's a new search feature on Facebook. And some of the conversation is it's great that this was done, but then there's a question about whether or not this will be historically accurate. And so, how do we combat anti-Semitism on social media and the internet, both locally and internationally and across our country?
That's a huge issue and a huge problem. And again, I've been kind of deeply involved with that and working with Facebook directly on this issue. So the good news, and I do think there is some good news on some of these things. One is that Facebook led the way, I think, to a certain degree. Google has followed more with more difficulty and so on. But I think they began to take steps in the past couple of year or two, to begin to face up to the problem. Facebook created a civil rights audit team, which did not deal only with anti-Semitism or Holocaust denial, but larger issues. And they've had ongoing contact with the international with Jewish community representatives. And they have announced that this has been in the works for quite a while, this button linking to a sort of a rebuttal site or a site giving the facts about the Holocaust. It probably needs to be strengthened a little bit and fact-checked a little bit, but it's a good idea. It's going in the right direction. And clearly, the recent events have forced and pushed places to the big tech social media companies to take more action on extremism in general, not just in this category. But one of the unintended consequences of that is that it's pushed some of the extremist rhetoric and discourse to smaller, less well-known, but now beginning to be more populated sites and hosts like Gab or Telegram, for example, which has seen a great migration, or Parler, which is itself as a total sort of free speech space that has had a significant movement of conservatives, legitimate moderate conservatives or mainstream conservatives, moving on to Ted Cruz and others, and yet at the same time has allowed some really extreme bad guys to be out there as well. And it's created an alternative home to Facebook and Google. So I think we're not calling for censorship. I don't think anybody wants, as far as I know, and I would reject personally, any attempts for government interference and censoring and limiting First Amendment rights. But there are ways where pressure can be put on these groups, which is what they're feeling now, that to live up to their terms of service frequently and generally, almost usually, bar hate speech and extremist acts. So we're looking at marginalization, which is very difficult in the world of social media, but there is movement on it finally.
Michael, would you like to jump into that, or?
There's unfortunately legally there's very little you can do, because there's even, if the threat isn't legitimate and there's no risk of bodily harm, imminent bodily harm, then there's very little we can do. So it's one of those things that'd be great if we could fix it, but it's very difficult.
I hear you. And, to reflect, our center from an international perspective has been harassed in terms of people who are focused on distorting the Holocaust. Many of the other sites that are part of this event have also experienced anti-Semitic swastikas and other anti-Semitic attacks that have happened. I wanted to introduce Dr. Menaza Afridi. She's professor.
Loser. I'll just introduce myself. Okay, hi everyone. Welcome. This is fantastic, Michael and Mark. I've been looking at the questions, and I have a lot of questions myself. By the way, I'm Dr. Freely from the Holocaust Genocide Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan College. So I welcome all of you. I'm one of the partners. And so I just wanted to say a couple of things about both of your, stellar presentations. But the first thing was, this question of language and symbols and epithets, right? So this idea that language somehow has no power. But as we know, rhetoric is very powerful. We know that because tonight we're looking at Holocaust remembrance. We look at Hitler's speeches. We look at other Mussolini's speeches, Stalin's speeches. So there's something very uncanny about not taking action when there's hateful rhetoric. Now, that's the first thing that I observe. And the second thing is, how do we criminalize hatred when we are actually looking at social media, which is constantly talking about anti-Semitism, racism against our Black brothers and sisters, anti-Muslim sentiment. I'm a Muslim, so I understand that that's also a big force. So the question is, how do we criminalize this? Or do we do what Canada does, right? That you can't have hate speech. So either Mark or Michael.
Well,
Michael, I'll let you start.
Okay, cool. Well, what I would say is that the hate crime statute addresses this by saying there has to be an underlying crime. And you could have offensive words said, which is awful, and those should be reported, but that's something that could hopefully be dealt with civilly. Like if someone's refusing to serve you and calling you names about it, then that's something that the city can look at and find the business. But it's not something that should be criminalized. When someone crosses the line, and a lot of times when someone's making repeated harassing, offensive comments, they will, and then we can pick it up at that point. But people are allowed to be awful people. They're allowed to make disgusting, repulsive statements, as long as it's recognized as such, and then hopefully people will be repulsed by them, and they'll lose power and lose the support of other people. And hopefully we can take care of it that way, especially if we react by pointing that out and saying it's no good.
And just a quick follow-up with you, Michael. People
Sure.
have been asking, are these laws, legislation across the states in the nation, or every state has their own?
This New York's is pretty similar to the standard, and I think almost all the states have similar language. They don't necessarily include every particular group like gender and gender identity, but most states have it. I forget the exact number, but I think it's in the high 40s have some sort of hate crime law.
Okay, and Mark, I want to ask you, when a country like Poland issues a statement like that, what is it that we can do here in the United States to talk about that statement? We're not Polish, we're Americans, How do we kind of look at that? Or how do I teach my students in the classroom who are Catholic Polish about these kind of laws? I mean, how do we negotiate this?
Well, I think first of all is to understand, and this is something that I think applies generally across the board for the United States, that we probably could do a little bit better, meaning a lot better, job of educating students about the rest of the world. And I think that, for example, in Poland, these laws are not supported by the entire Polish nation. They may be supported by the Polish government, they may be supported by an element in Poland, but Poland is still the same country that during World War II had the only organized national organization devoted to the rescue Jews, an organization called Żegota. No other occupied government or country under Nazi rule had that kind of a widespread national organization. And I think that, there's a lot to give credit to Poles, Jewish and non-Jewish, throughout the years, and up to including protesting about this kind of attempted civil procedure. I think what we can do, first of all, is as you pointed earlier, I think that's one of the core things of my presentation tonight, was that words, facts matter. We have to counter disinformation, misinformation, and it's very easy to stand up and say we're against Nazis. Pretty much everyone in Western society is against Nazis. It's much harder to cut through the rhetoric and say, you know what, that's distorting the reality. It's twisting it. It's taking something out of context and taking it to a bad position. And again, this can be done on either side of the aisle. It's not a Democratic, Republican, conservative, liberal issue. It's a reality issue. It's not political. It's kind of good versus bad in a sense. And I think that we also need to hold our leaders accountable and let them know whether there was an event in New York where the Polish consulate suggested honoring somebody from Poland, giving an award in memory of Jan Karski, who was one of the great Polish patriots, an incredible man. I met him once, and it was just an incredibly memorable experience. A Polish Catholic who risked his life to go into the Warsaw Ghetto and elsewhere and carry that message out of Poland during World War II to the West, and never went back to Poland. Ended up teaching in Georgetown for the rest of his life. And to give this award to a historian who was an outright anti-Semite, and to their credit, when the Polish Foreign Ministry in Poland found out about it after we blew it up in New York, they were not happy about it. They pulled it back and so on and so forth. But naming and shaming works. In Congress, when people are named to ambassadorships, for example, they go through confirmation hearings. Our representatives can ask questions and put issues on the agenda that say that we care about these issues. And we can have a moral voice. The United States has a position. It used to be a special envoy on anti-Semitism. It's now an ambassador on anti-Semitism. They are the voice of the US government internationally on these issues. We have a special envoy in the State Department on Holocaust issues. He represents the United States on these issues. They can speak up and translate and transmit messages if Washington knows and our representatives know that it's important. So those are just some of the ways to be involved.
Okay, yeah, thank you, Mark. I mean, one of the things that comes up and has come up in the chat a little bit, and I think you kind of said this already, is that anti-Semitism is everywhere. It's not Republican, it's not Democrat, it's not independent, it's not liberal, it's not conservative. I want people to understand that. And it's hard, because you say, okay, well, if people are against racism, they must be liberal. That's not always the case. So that is something we need to think about deeply and reflect, especially today when there's so much polarization between political parties and who we represent and who we don't represent. So I just wanted to throw that out there and see if you had a definition of a sort of maybe like a generic definition that we could use to talk about this issue of polarization.
Well, I'll just say that in terms of a definition of anti-Semitism, I'd recommend that people look at the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's working definition of anti-Semitism, which has become, I mentioned that earlier, the kind of baseline status definition of anti-Semitism throughout the world. It's used by the State Department as well in the United States for the United States government. And you can find that online, IHRA, working definition of anti-Semitism. But picking up on what you said, and maybe, I don't know how much time we have, but this was going to be my my big takeaway at the end was that one of the things that most concerns me and that I call for the most, that I think is the politicization of anti-Semitism. We can't continuously have people on the left, on the progressive side, targeting people on the right for anti-Semitism and people on the right pointing fingers at the progressives. I think we need to start looking at our own, and you just said it, at our own houses first. Whatever side of the aisle we find ourselves, even in the middle, look there first and stand up first about that, because that's the only way to be sincere and serious about the problem. On the positive side, and I really think there are positive elements, I mentioned that there was a spate of incidents in the 1980s and 90s, and yet we recovered and came out of that. We can recover from these as well. And in Washington, where I work very closely, in both houses of Congress, in the Senate and in the House, there are two bipartisan task forces on anti-Semitism, each one led by a Republican and a Democrat. And they work together incredibly well. I don't even know if they agree on any other issues. These people work together, come across the aisle, and they do phenomenal work. And to me, it's one of the most encouraging things in the climate in Washington that we have, that they've been flourishing for the past few years, and I hold them up as a model of positive engagement. And I think between the accountability that we can demand of our leaders, the toning down the rhetoric in general, caring about misinformation, politicization, and so on, these are the ways forward that we can really make a big difference.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mark. Michael, do you want to say a few words to the audience? I mean, I have a lot of questions.
There's nothing better than following Mark after he does a statement like that. Wow. I would just say that, when I think about combating hate crime, the thing that's critical is just reporting. If you see a hate crime occurring, you got to call, even if you're not the victim, just stand up for whoever the victim was. Call 911, let them know what's happening. If you're not sure whether it's a hate crime or if it's just someone spouting off, still let the police know so that they can respond. And even if they respond and it's not a hate crime, it's going to calm things down. And hopefully by doing stuff like that, we can make the world a safer place and just get everyone together and get rid of the hate.
Thank you so much, Mark and Michael. And let us not forget it's Holocaust Remembrance Day today. And that, I tell my students all the time that teaching genocide and the Holocaust, you realize that racism is what leads to this kind of killing. And we have to be very careful how we think about each other at a time like this. So thank you from the Queensborough Community College. I think we lost Laura, but she's back?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, where are you?
I think I'm on the other side of the screen somewhere.
There you are.
So
I was just going to thank everyone. Go ahead, Laura.
we had a glitch. We prepared for that glitch. It's not a day during the pandemic when someone's Wi-Fi doesn't go out. So I wanted to thank you, Michael. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Manaz. Thank you to Dr. Mangino. Thank you to DA Katz and all of the centers who co-sponsored today, including Manaz's center, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan College, the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in White Plains, the Holocaust Museum and Center for Tolerance and Education at Rockland Community College, the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County, and the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center here at Queensborough Community College. Stay safe, be well, everyone. Thank you.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Great to see everybody.